Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. If you're new to my channel, my name is Sergey, and back in 1971, I was born in Kiev, Soviet Ukraine. So in today's video, I want to tell you about Soviet-era migrant workers that used to be called limitчики or LIMITA. 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 Limitчик. Limitчик. While talking about LIMITA Soviet migrant workers, we'll be talking about Propiska system. And I talked a lot about it in my video from 2016 that called How Did Soviet Government Control Its People Using Propiska System? The link will be below in the comment section. So back in the Soviet days, people were required to have Propiska, a government permission to live at specific location, town, city, or the village. And that Propiska was a rubber stamp in your passport that says that you are propisan, you are registered at specific address at specific city. So of course, that condition greatly limited people's mobility, or so-called migration, geographic mobility, which United States government refers as to movement of people from one location to another within the country. And I couldn't figure out if it's a good or bad for the country if people have a high or low mobility. My understanding, if you look at the country as a body, people in that country is kind of like blood. So good circulation of blood means it's a healthy body. And I think some economists consider that if people move a lot, if they have a high mobility, they're not stuck in a specific place, it's a good sign for the economy. It means the country is healthy and economy is healthy. You know, since I live in America, I work with Americans. In the beginning, I was shocked when I learned how much Americans move around the country. You know, they were born in Nebraska, then the parents went somewhere else to California, and then he ended up going to Florida. So like probably 90% of people I work with, they're not from so-called Michiganders. They came from somewhere else. They moved already many times. So comparing with Soviet Union, maybe 10% of people I knew, they came from other areas in Kiev, and most of those were military families, so they just moved because military moved them. It wasn't their own decision. There are many reasons why Americans want to move. Some want a warmer climate, so they move south. Some move in for better paid jobs, so they go to California or New York, or they want a city lifestyle, or they want cooler weather, so they move in northern Michigan. So there are so many reasons why people move, or you know, their job is moving. In Soviet Union, like my parents' era, there was the only reason people moved is get out of the villages and move into the cities, because villages was like almost 100 years behind. No one had running water. People used outhouses, used wood-burning stoves to stay warm in the winter. So if you move in a city, especially a big, large city like Kiev, Leningrad, Moscow, you'll get apartment which has hot running water, you know, so conveniences. So that would be like you're jumping, I said, almost 100 years ahead. So that was the only drive that young people were trying to move from the villages into the cities. And that's what my parents did back in the late 60s. They moved out of villages and they met in Kiev. And of course, #1 destination in the Soviet Union was Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union, because it was supplied the best with foods and other items. And Propiska was the system to hold off the flood of people. You couldn't just come to Moscow and, you know, rent an apartment or get an apartment. In fact, it was illegal to be in Moscow for more than 7 days if you didn't have a Propiska in Moscow. But then in the late 50s and 60s, the Soviet government ran into a problem. They were trying to build more factories, continue industrialization, but they were building factories in the large cities, and they experienced the shortage of workers because the local people didn't want to do a lot of jobs, and they had a choice to do something different. And they couldn't raise the pay because it's all centrally controlled economy. So they're trying to figure out how to attract new workers and without offering higher pay. And that's how they come up with a system of limited Propiska. So that's what the LIMITA, limitчики came from. It's limited Propiska. So in order to entice people from out of country, from small towns to come to Moscow or Leningrad and work at those bad jobs at low pay, they will offer them first dormitories, and then in 3 to 4 years you can get propiska if you stay with the same factory. And after you get in propiska, you can get yourself on a list, waiting list, to get an apartment. And that's how this new movement started of people coming from small towns. Usually it would be single gals and boys, and they live in dormitories, and they work on construction or factories. And so their lifestyle was quite hard because, you know, living in a dorm, sharing a room with other people. And then they will just work until they get propiska, and then hoping to get an apartment soon after. Pretty much my parents were LIMITA. They came and they found the jobs that offered dormitories. We even had a movie called «Одиноким предоставляется общежитие», and then you get propiska in Kiev, and then you're trying to get an apartment. And of course, local city people, so Moskvichi, people who lived in Moscow, Leningradцы that live in Leningrad, or Kievляне that lived in Kiev, they weren't exactly happy about this flood of the migrant workers, LIMITA, not because they were afraid to lose those jobs. We had 100% employment in the Soviet Union, remember that? But they didn't want those jobs in the first place. But they had to wait for their apartments for 20 years already, and now you have these new people coming in, and they were actually being placed on a shorter waiting list because they took those jobs like in construction, at the factories, and they were getting shorter waiting lists to get an apartment. And besides the longer waiting list for the apartments, city people also experienced criminal situation getting worse because most of these people coming to the cities were single. That's what the factories were looking for. They didn't want families because you needed to find them bigger apartments. Single guys or gals, you can pack them, 4 or 5 per room. So these young roughnecks will come to the city, and then of course on their days off, you work hard, you party hard, and that will create this whole not really good criminal situation in the areas around those dormitories. You're probably all familiar with the term gold digger. So that's usually a younger lady that's looking for the older rich dude. We had kind of similar situation in the Soviet Union, but it will be called propiska digger. So propiska diggers girls were ladies coming from out of town, and they would work at the factory or anywhere else in order to have a housing option, but then they'll be literally hunting for local Muscovites or Kievляне in order to marry him, and that way you get an apartment right away, you get propiska, and your life is all good. And I remember my mom's stories about her arrival to Kiev, and she was very attractive when she came. She was like 17 years old girl, and she was telling me that she had a couple of guys, and she was like, I'm so stupid, I had this nice guy, he lived in Kiev, had propiska, he had a nice little apartment, and he liked me so much, he really wanted me to meet her mom, but I don't know why, I just fell heels over head in love with your dad, and I basically let that other guy go, and my housing story, after I married your dad was horrible. I already mentioned many times we had to live in the dorms for 5 years, then a tiny apartment for a couple other years. So my mom was kind of a propiska digger, but she actually went for my dad who had no apartment available. And this LIMITA situation and propiska diggers was such a common occurrence that they even made a movie that I mentioned earlier, Москва слезам не верит, Moscow doesn't believe in tears, back in 1979. So as I mentioned, this movie came out in 1979, so I was only 8 years old. So I don't recall watching this movie, maybe later on when it came on the TV. I'm planning to watch it again, so I'm going back to the USSR. And I would strongly recommend for you guys, it should be available on YouTube. If I find it, I'll put the link in the comment section below this video. Alright, so spoiler alert, if you're planning to watch this movie, you probably want to pause the video now because I'm going to tell you kind of the basics of the story. So the story begins in 1958 when 3 girlfriends arrived to Moscow from somewhere out of, they call it provincia, so middle of nowhere. and they live in dorms, and one of them find a job in construction. Another one works at some kind of factory making parts, tool and die, and the third one works at the bakery, so that's large bread factory. And all of them trying to figure out how to, get their lives going in Moscow, and all of them trying to marry Muscovites in order to get propiska and housing. As I mentioned, this LIMITA situation and propiska diggers were such a common knowledge that Soviet censors didn't bother to, shoot this movie down, because it was just like, yeah, that's what's going on. And that movie went out. It became the second most popular Soviet movie ever. Over 84 million people watched that movie in the movie theaters. And if you ask me, wait a minute, so what was the #1 Soviet blockbuster ever? That movie was called The Pirates of the 20th Century, Пираты 20 века. That one I definitely watched, but I need to watch it again because I don't remember much. And that one got almost 90 million people watched it on the big screen. And if I find this movie on YouTube, I'll also post the link in the comment section below the video. Okay, so back to the movie Moscow Doesn't Believe in Tears. So the second part of the movie, so it begins in 1958 when 3 girlfriends arrived to Moscow. And then the story continues 20 years later, so 1978, and it shows them how their lives went and what they managed to accomplish in 20 years. And it just shows, some got successful but didn't find love. Other ones just found love but no success. So as I said, movie was quite popular despite its pretty boring topic, like in my opinion. So propiska system was created to limit people from moving around without government control, and it was also especially designed to protect the large cities like Moscow, Leningrad from flood of people from out of country, because the conditions were just so much better. But in the meantime, they made this loophole for LIMITA workers, and as a result, close to 70% of new people that came to Moscow were actually LIMITA workers. And so that was the main driver of growth in the large cities, is people coming to work and trying to get propiska, trying to get an apartment. And I saw with my own eyes the results of such a migration, because every time I would come to the village to stay with my grandparents, other kids will come to stay with their grandparents. So all the kids, like my mother and my dad, they left the villages, moved to the large cities, and now they were sending grandchildren back to the village to stay for the summer break. But there was hardly any people left. I think in my village, probably close to 90% of my mom's generation, they all left, and they moved to Moscow or Kiev or smaller towns. And this is why villages are dying out in Ukraine and Russia, because goes way back to the Soviet Union when they started this LIMITA workers thing going. Some modern economists think that this LIMITA workforce was actually not a good thing for productivity, since people came not for the money, not to get some specific job, just to get any job that provides propiska. And after 5 years or whatever, then they got their propiska deal and maybe an apartment, they will leave that factory as soon as they can to find something better and easier. So because pay was about the same, but working in some cozy job in a chair was way easier than work in a construction site or in a bakery. So this was another peculiar feature of life in the Soviet Union, this artificial limit on the people's mobility in the country. And I said, if you guys can post a comment what you think about it. I personally think it's a good thing when people can freely move around the country or even around the world, looking for better opportunities, looking for better place to live. And it's just kind of weird to think. So, for example, I can decide tomorrow, okay, I want to move to New York City and live and work there, and no one can stop me except my own money, right? In Soviet Union, they're like, you can't just go to New York City. You need to get some job there first that provides propiska. You can't just move in, rent an apartment, or buy a house. It was impossible. Okay, my friends, all I have for you today. I hope you found this topic of LIMITA interesting. As always, don't forget to like this video, share with your friends. Thank you so much for support my work on patreon.com or being a member here on YouTube, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Потому что если дороги будут, то по ним неприятель проедет и прямо в сердце России попадет.
Я с ними согласен абсолютно.